The city of Mesa, Arizona is a suburb in the Phoenix area where I live. Perhaps the most notable features of Mesa are its sizable Mormon population, next to Salt Lake City, the largest in the world, and a huge Mormon temple located on exquisitely kept grounds in the center of the city. Even though I admired the landscaping and architecture from a distance, I had never been interested enough in the temple to go inside until one day when I read a newspaper article describing a special inner sector of Mormon temples where no one is allowed except faithful members of the church. Even potential converts must not see it. However, there is one exception to this rule. For a few days after a temple has been built, non-members can tour the entire structure, including the restricted section. The newspaper story went on to report that the Mesa Temple had recently undergone major renovations and that the changes had been so great that it had been classified as new by church leaders. That meant that for the next few days only, non-Mormon visitors could see the temple area that was traditionally banned to them. I immediately decided to take a tour, and I called a Mormon friend to see if he wanted to join me. The conversation that followed taught me something valuable about the next major principle of influence I want to cover: the principle of scarcity.
Hello?
Jack, this is Bob Cialdini. Listen, I just saw an article in the paper that says the entire Mormon temple in Mesa is going to be open to visitors for the next couple of days. So I'm going to go over and take a tour today. You want to come along?
No, I think I'll pass. I've got some errands I really should get to. But I'm curious, why do you want to go over there? You have some interest in the Mormon religion that I don't know about?
No, I can't say that I do.
What is it then? Some general interest in church architecture?
No, it's just that the special intersection of the temple will be open to non-Mormons for a few days, and then it'll be closed to me forever.
Well, what is it exactly that you expect to see there? I've been in it myself, and there's nothing more spectacular or stirring than you'd see in any number of churches and cathedrals in town.
You may be right, Jack. There's nothing in particular that I want to see. I guess I just want to be able to be there, just to be able to stand on that spot sometime in the next couple of days, because if I don't now, I'll never be able to. When I hung up the phone, I realized that I had admitted something very instructive to Jack and to myself, and that was how powerful an effect the principle of scarcity had on me. This place that on its own merits held no special appeal for me became much more attractive merely because it was rapidly becoming less available. A look at the relevant research shows that I'm far from alone in this respect. Just about everyone finds opportunities that are rare or dwindling in their availability more attractive simply because of their scarcity. One study done in North Carolina demonstrated how this principle works in a consumer preference test of chocolate chip cookies. Participants in the study were given a jar of chocolate chip cookies to taste and rate. For some of them, there were 10 cookies in the jar. For others, the jar contained only 2 cookies. Despite the fact that all the cookies had come from the same Nabisco box, the people who got only 2 cookies rated them as more desirable to eat in the future, more attractive as a consumer item, and able to command a higher price in the store than did people who got 10 of those same identical cookies. A report of the cookie study appeared in a prominent psychology journal in 1975. Remember at the start of this program, I mentioned how very often important results like this one sit in the scientific journals unused for years. Well, I have a hunch that the Coca-Cola Company wished that it had paid attention to these findings when, 10 years after they appeared, it began what Time magazine calls the marketing fiasco of the decade. On April 23, 1985, the company decided to pull their traditional formula for Coke off the market and replace it with New Coke. I'm sure you remember what happened that day. It was the day that the syrup hit the fan. In the words of one news report, quote, "The Coca-Cola Company failed to foresee the sheer frustration and fury its action would create. From Bangor to Burbank, from Detroit to Dallas, tens of thousands of Coke lovers rose up as one to revile the taste of the new Coke and demand their old Coke back." The best example is a man who lived in Seattle named Gay Mullins, retired real estate investor, who became so incensed that his beloved soft drink was going to be pulled off the market that he formed an organization called the Old Cola Drinkers of America, who filed a class action suit against the Coca-Cola Company to make the recipe public, who issued banners and buttons and t-shirts, sent them out by the thousand free of charge to anybody who wanted to be in their organization, had a hotline for disgruntled callers and for clinically depressed callers so that they could be counseled out of their post-Coke depression, a different kind of Coke. It did not matter that in 2 blind taste tests, Mr. Mullins chose the new Coke over the old.
Isn't that amazing? The thing that Mr. Mullins liked more was less valuable to him than the thing he was being denied. It's worth noting that even after giving in to customer demands and bringing the old Coke back to the shelves, company officials were stung and somewhat bewildered by what had hit them. As Donald Keogh, then president of the company, said, "It's a wonderful American mystery, a lovely American enigma, and you can't measure it any more than you can measure love, pride, or patriotism." Here's where I disagree with Mr. Keogh. First of all, it's no mystery, not if you understand the psychology of the scarcity principle, especially when a product is as wrapped up in a person's history and traditions as Coca-Cola has always been in this country. Of course that person is going to want it more as it becomes less available. Second, this urge is something that can be measured. In fact, I happen to think that the Coca-Cola Company had measured it in their own market research prior to making their infamous decision to change. But they didn't see it there because they weren't looking for it the way a detective of influence would. The people in the Coca-Cola Company are no penny pinchers when it comes to market research. They have been willing to spend millions of dollars to assure that they have analyzed the market correctly for a new product. And in their decision to switch to the new Coke, they were no different. From 1981 to 1984, they very carefully tested the new and old formulas in taste tests involving nearly 200,000 people in 25 cities. What they found in their blind taste tests was a clear preference, 55% to 45%, for the new Coke over the old. Also, some of the tests were not conducted with unmarked samples. In those tests, the participants were told which was the old and which was the new Coke beforehand. Under those conditions, the preference for the new Coke increased by an additional 6%. Now, you might say, that's strange. How does that fit with the fact that people expressed a decided preference for the old Coke when the company finally introduced the new Coke? The only way it fits is by applying the principle of scarcity to the puzzle. During the taste tests, it was the new Coke that was unavailable to people for purchase. And so, when they knew which sample was which, they showed an especially strong preference for what they couldn't otherwise have. But later, when the company replaced the traditional recipe with the new one, now it was the old Coke that people couldn't have, and it became the favorite. My point is that the 6% increase in preference for the new Coke was right there in the company's research when they looked at the difference between blind taste test results and identified taste test results. But they interpreted it wrong. They said to themselves, "Oh good, this means that when people know that they're getting something new, their desire for it will shoot up." But in fact, what the 6% increase really meant was that when people know what they can't have, their desire for it will shoot up. One lesson that we can learn from this is that people are more motivated by the thought of losing something than they are by the thought of gaining something. This means that when you're trying to get someone interested in what you have to offer, it's not enough to talk about the benefits of your product or idea. You must also highlight its unique features, those advantages that the other person will stand to lose by not choosing your product or idea. So,
Let's say you're in sales and you've got a customer who just can't seem to make up his mind on whether to buy from your company. A customer who keeps procrastinating on the decision. Before your next call on this individual, you need to stop and think not just about what he can gain from going with your product, but what he stands to lose by failing to do so. Those unique features, or that unique combination of features, service, and terms that he can't get elsewhere. Do you recall the cookie experiment I talked about a few minutes ago? There was one other finding in that study that I haven't told you about yet. Remember how some participants got 10 cookies and others got only 2 cookies? Well, some of those people who got only 2 cookies to taste and rate were first given 10 cookies by the experimenter. He then came back to them and said, "Oh, sorry, I can't give you those 10 cookies after all. There's been such a demand for cookies by the other participants in the study that I can only give you 2 of them." And with that, he replaced the jar of 10 cookies with a jar of just 2. Well, when these people rated the cookies, they evaluated them as more attractive than any other participants did in the entire experiment. What this finding tells us is there is a factor that intensifies the impact of scarcity on the judgments that people make. Yes, people value scarce resources more than abundant ones, but this is especially true when they are in competition with others for those scarce resources. Competition, rivalry for scarce items and opportunities can make people lose all sense of perspective and go slightly loco. What about you? Have you ever found yourself raising the ante against some rival for a business opportunity until you emerged the winner, and then the dust settled and you realized that in the end you hadn't won a good business opportunity? All you had won was a battle? How do you learn to avoid that kind of poor judgment? The big problem is, just at the time when you want to be rational and logical, the head-to-head competition you're in is making your emotions rise, your focus narrow, and your blood come up. Logic goes right out the window. Here's what I'd suggest to handle the problem. Instead of letting this sweep of emotion lead you into making poor decisions, use it to lead you to good ones. Whenever you feel yourself experiencing a rush of competitive emotion in a situation involving a scarce resource or opportunity, use that feeling as a signal to stop short. Use it as a kind of yellow flag, cautioning you to slow down, to calm yourself, so that you can bring rationality and logic back into the picture. Then, assess the situation based on the genuine merits of the opportunity before you. This way, you'll win more than a contested deal. You'll win what you were looking for all along, the right deal. Let's say you're in a situation in which a particular customer is playing you and a competitor against one another. He keeps asking for concession after concession from each of you to stay in the running for his contract. And he makes a point of informing each of you every time the other makes a better offer. As soon as you feel yourself getting frustrated and agitated, it's time to use those feelings to step back away from the situation rather than to plunge into it with an increased fury and desire to beat your rival. Step back and calculate whether winning in this instance would amount to losing, and whether the rational thing would be to walk away, leaving what's now become a bad business deal to your opponent. If with a now clear head you can see that the benefits of the business aren't worth the costs, and if you do walk away, you will have won. After all, leaving the unfavorable deals to your competitors is one of the surest ways to triumph over them.
We've all been in situations where we're holding off